I wanted to spend some time today talking in general terms about what's been going on at the legislature and some issues that I think are particularly important to folks that are active in our Republican parties around the state. I've been doing this really since the session ended. Now, before I get into that, I do want to say I wouldn't have a whole lot to talk to you about if the legislature was full of people like Micah and Bill Heath. I would just sort of show up and say, we took care of everything, see y'all next year. But seriously, Mike has been a great friend of mine before he was in the legislature, and he's been a terrific House member. He's championed conservative ideals. I know you know that because you know him. And then, of course, Senator Heath, we sit just down the road from one another. He has been a real inspiration to me. If I'm confused on an issue, which happens from time to time, I'll turn to him because he really is the gold standard for conservatism in the state Senate. So y'all are very, very fortunate, I think, in your representation at the General Assembly. What I want to start off with, I know that you've had Virginia Galloway talk to you a little bit about the Religious Freedom Restoration Act and the fight we've been having about that. But I wanted to kind of start there. And before I do that, I learned a few months ago that it's important to sort of provide you with the following disclaimer before I get into what I'm going to have to say to you today. I think that the Republican Party is doing a lot of good things in our state. I think we've got a lot of good policies that we're pursuing in the legislature. What my remarks today are going to be focused on are things that I think we can be doing better. And that's not to pick at or be unkind to folks that are my fellow Republicans that serve in the legislature or in other capacities. But I believe if you're up on a Saturday morning at a meeting like this, then you're probably like me. On the day before the election, the night before in the early morning hours, you're putting up signs. You host coffees at your home. You make phone calls. You contribute to candidates. And you don't do all of that so that we can go down to the legislature and give you a job that you might give us a report card grade of C. You know, you want an A+. And so my remarks today are designed to kind of point out the areas where I think we can do better. So I wanted to say that before I got into the kind of meat and potatoes. But so the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, let's talk about that briefly. If you've heard about it before, you know there's a federal law that protects your right of free exercise when it comes to dealing with the federal government. If the federal government does something, they pass a law or they promulgate some policy that in any way burdens your religious freedom, you get the same level of legal protection as you do your other First Amendment rights, like free speech, free association, and free press. Well, there was a Supreme Court decision in the late 1990s that said that federal law did not apply to acts of state and local government. And so 31 states since that decision in 1997 have acted and said, we want to have the same protections for our citizens from state and local government that they have from the federal government. That's all the religious freedom legislation does. So why has it been so controversial? Why has it been so difficult to try and get it passed? Next year will be the third legislative session that we've been trying to pass this bill. And the truth is, there's been a lot of opposition from far left groups, from LGBT groups like Georgia Equality. The things they say about the legislation are pretty easily proven wrong. They're easy to knock down. People say that it's a license to discriminate. Federal RFRA has been around for 22 years. I was having this argument on Twitter this morning with somebody. I said, point out one case to me anywhere in the country where someone has been mistreated or discriminated against And a court has said, yeah, you can do that because of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And you always get silence in response to that, because that's not what this bill is about. The only way this bill comes into the area of discrimination is it keeps the government from discriminating against people of faith. And that is what it is designed to do. But that's not the opposition that's held us up in the legislature. I mean, I'm here to tell you the Georgia Equalities of the world and Better Georgia, they don't get a whole lot done at the legislature. So why is it that we've had this problem? We've had this problem because very large multinational corporations that are headquartered in this state, their executives, many of whom are not from Georgia, have different values than you and I do. They think that what their cultural norms, their liberal far left cultural norms, should be applied to our state. And they think they ought to be able to use the awesome power of government to do that. And that is why we have had the problem that we've had. You know, when you have the CEO of Delta Airlines saying that religious freedom is not in line with his company's values, you know, we've got a serious disconnect. We've got a serious problem. And what I will say to you is this: I feel like I'm as pro-business a Republican as there is at the legislature. I believe in low taxes. I believe in a simple tax code. I believe in getting the government off the back of the small businessman. I believe in low regulation, the least amount of regulation possible. But when you start telling me that our individual civil liberties are somehow a business issue, we're going to have a serious problem. Because, and you may not, religious freedom legislation may not be the most important thing to you. I've had conversations with people who don't really subscribe to a particular faith, and I say to them, the reason it's important is that religious freedom, founders were pretty smart. They put free exercise in as the First Amendment, as one of the first freedoms, because they understood that the right of conscience, the right to believe what you sincerely believe, is fundamental in a free society. And if we don't have that, we don't have any other individual liberty at the end of the day. If you allow people to come in and say, you know, it's bad for business, McKoon's religious freedom bill, that's bad for business, and you allow that to keep us from moving forward on it, I guarantee you, in the next year or two, we're going to be having the same conversation, except somebody's going to be saying, you know, this company from New Jersey or New York, they'd love to come move to Georgia, but our gun laws are just way out there. You know, it's way too easy to get a gun in Georgia. I mean, you can have the same conversation about every individual civil liberty that is protected under our laws. And the other thing I'll say, and then I'll move on to some other issues, people talk about the First Amendment. Well, Josh G., we've got the First Amendment. We don't need anything else. The First Amendment is a promise. It's a promise that was made over 200 years ago, that you're going to have your free exercise protected. But courts have to figure out, what does that mean? Okay? I mean, I can't say, for example, my religion teaches me that I don't have to pay taxes, because I'm sure we'd have a lot of folks subscribing to that religious belief, right? So there's some limitation, and courts have to figure that out. That's how we wound up getting the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. So the question is, what kind of test are they going to use? Are they going to use the test that the Supreme Court left us in Employment Division versus Smith, which is called rational basis? What does rational basis mean? It means if I have a reason, I can infringe on your religious liberty. Should it be that standard? Or should it be the standard that applies to the other fundamental first freedoms in the Bill of Rights, which is you got to have a compelling state interest. It can't just be a reason, it has to be a very compelling reason. And you've got to be able to show us that that is the least restrictive means of achieving that interest. That's what happened in the Hobby Lobby case. It wasn't a matter of whether or not the government had a compelling interest. It was that, you know what, you've given these religious employers an accommodation. The Green family gets the same accommodation because you've shown there's a less restrictive way of achieving that interest. So if this is an important issue to you, I don't have to tell you to talk to your legislators because I know where they are on it. What you do need to do is you need to talk with anybody affiliated with your local Chamber of Commerce, because I have it on very good authority that the Georgia Chamber, which is largely funded by these 4 or 5 multinational companies, is going to continue next year. They're going to continue their opposition to this bill. And I've heard from local chamber executives around the state that they are reaching out to them and asking them to oppose the bill. Your local chamber speaks for you. They speak for the businesses in your community, and so they need to hear from you, and they need to hear from you sooner rather than later if this is important to you, because the way this is going to play out next year, I can guarantee you, is people are going to say it's bad for business. We don't need to do this because it's bad for business. Last year it was about discrimination. Now that we've knocked that down, next year it's going to be it's bad for business. I'm going to mention this story and then I really am going to move on. If the Religious Freedom Bill is bad for business, one of the things that I was told during the session is, Josh, Volvo wants to come to Georgia. You keep pushing this Religious Freedom Bill, Volvo is not going to come to Georgia. We're going to lose jobs. We're going to lose capital investment. We need to back off on this Religious Freedom Bill, Josh. So we didn't pass it, right? So Volvo came down to 2 finalists. Pooler, Georgia, North Charleston, South Carolina. Georgia, no religious freedom law. South Carolina, the most strict state religious freedom statute in the country. So if they're right, if my friends in Atlanta are right, and this is anti-economic development, then obviously Volvo picked Pooler, Georgia, right? Wrong. They picked North Charleston, South Carolina. Why? Because businesses, your business, my business, every business owner makes their decisions based on dollars and cents. They make their decisions based on the regulatory environment and the tax environment. They don't make their decisions based on whether you believe in individual civil liberty or not. So don't let anybody tell you that this is anti-economic development, because it's not. And you know what? The mayor of Atlanta said, we might lose the Super Bowl. We passed the Religious Freedom Bill. Well, let me tell you what. When our founders signed the Declaration of Independence, you know they were potentially signing their death warrant, and they knew that. They were willing to lose their lives over the principle of religious freedom. So yes, I would be willing to lose a football game if that's what it came to. But I don't believe that would happen, because every other major NFL venue is covered by a religious freedom bill, something I made the mayor aware of. I said, I guess they're not going to have it in Miami, Phoenix, or New Orleans either. So anyway, let me move on to a couple other topics that I think are important for you to hear about. Georgia issues driver's licenses to illegal aliens. Right now, the state of Georgia has issued over 18,000 driver's licenses to illegal aliens. So, and it's really not the fault, at least originally, of our state legislature that happened. We had a law in place that said you had to be lawfully present to get a Georgia driver's license. Well, our president, who is heading the most lawless administration, I believe, in American history, introduced a policy where he said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to take people who are in the country illegally, we're going to let them know we're not going to deport them, then we're going to give them a social security number, and we're going to give them a federal work permit. Well, when that happened, when they got the federal work permit and the social security number, now it is at least an argument that they're lawfully present even though they are still illegal aliens, because the government is saying we're not going to deport you. So the Department of Driver Services started issuing driver's licenses to these folks. And by the way, the driver's license, if you pull out your driver's license and look at it, the only difference between the driver's license you have and the one that's being issued to an illegal alien is it has the words limited term in small black print at the top of the license. It doesn't say non-citizen. It doesn't say ineligible to register to vote. There is no indication of that person's status in this country on the license. So I pre-filed a bill last year, Senate Bill 6. Says we're going to change it from lawfully present to lawful status. Pretty simple. I don't think y'all tell me if I'm wrong here and if you think this is controversial. I think if you're in the United States illegally, we shouldn't give you a Georgia driver's license. That's my position. That bill has sat in the Senate Public Safety Committee since January. We did not have a hearing on it. We did not have a committee vote on it. We did have a committee hearing on giving in-state tuition to illegal aliens at our public colleges and universities. Now, so I offered an amendment. You can do this. There was a bill having to do with driver's licenses. And so I said, okay, y'all not gonna give me a committee hearing. We'll just see about putting my bill on this bill, okay? So in the Senate, you gotta have 5 people say, we want a recorded vote. We want a roll call vote on this amendment. I couldn't get a roll call vote on my amendment. So I can tell you the amendment failed. I can't tell you who voted for it and who voted against it. Well, I can tell you where Senator Heath was on the matter. But here's my question for you as Georgia Republicans. Should we ever have a situation where an amendment gets offered to a bill and you're not able to find out how your senator voted on the bill? I think I'm accountable. I ought to be accountable to the 175,000 or so folks I represent. So I ought to have to vote on that. So I'm going to tell y'all, and this is going to make some people mad. I do that from time to time. I'm going to introduce a change to our rules because I think that rule is wrong. And I think that if we offer an amendment that's going to change a bill, then every one of those votes ought to be recorded and you ought to know how your senator voted on the bill.
Amen.
And we're going to keep working on this issue about driver's licenses. I don't want to see, and we're expanding the bill too. We want to make sure that every law enforcement agency in this state respects immigration holds. I don't want to see in Georgia what happened in San Francisco where a young woman named Kate Steinley was murdered by someone who should have been in a jail awaiting deportation. But we got 3 counties, Clayton, Fulton, and DeKalb right now, that are not honoring federal ICE holds. So we need to take care of that. Now, getting the high sign, it's dangerous. You give a lawyer a microphone and a captive audience, but I'm going to wrap myself up with one more point I want to make to you about what I think is an important rule change. We all went through the debate over Obamacare. How many people were upset that your congressman didn't have 24 hours to read that bill before voting on it? I mean, pretty much everybody? Okay. In the Georgia General Assembly, in the Senate, we get a conference committee report. House passes something, Senate passes something. They work out the changes. We get a final report. It's called a conference committee report. That bill, for the first 4 years I was in the legislature, would sit on my desk for an hour before we could vote on it. I wanted to expand the number of hours we got, so this year we got 2 hours. I wanted 24 hours, we got 2 hours. We had a bill this year that gave a tax break to Mercedes-Benz. Mercedes-Benz was already moving to Georgia. That deal had already been done. But this bill says for every Mercedes-Benz employee that leases a car through Mercedes-Benz as a perk of their employment, that they're not going to have to pay the tax that you and I pay when we buy a car or when we lease a car. Now that got dropped on my desk at 10:36 p.m. on the last day of the session. And we voted on it after midnight, after there had been 2 attempts to suspend the 2-hour rule for us to have at least 2 hours to look at it that had been voted down. And we passed that in the middle of the night. Same thing happened with the transportation bill. That was on day 39. They put it on our desks at 9:30. For the first time, it hadn't been in the House version or the Senate version, there's a $5 per night hotel fee. I represent a border community.